Yeah, so I think we're gonna start our event. Thank you so much for those who join us today, and thank you for the two great speakers for becoming our speaker today. And just a brief introduction of Vital to those who are new to our club. Vital is a healthcare innovation that we inspire, connect, and to create a community for the Northeastern University students. And Vital is open to students of all backgrounds. And today's event is the second event of our digital health speaker event. And today's theme is mental health. And we are honored to bring in two great speakers. VanHaren is the founder and CEO of Spotting, and Sarah Cooper is the product designer at MacRhythms. And I wonder if you guys can introduce a little bit about your backgrounds and your, yeah.
Sure. I'm going to go first. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy VanHaren, and I am the founder of Pump Spotting, and we are on a mission to solve some of the challenges of breastfeeding and postpartum at scale. Our software helps nourish parents when they're on the journey of feeding, and we're rethinking how we can help decrease postpartum depression, increase breastfeeding rates, and really help parents thrive during that time period. My background is in digital marketing and community building, and I came to Pump Spotting through my own journey of feeling really isolated, feeling really depressed, trying to navigate my own journey. And that's what drove me to build Pump Spotting, bringing my background of community building and connection and how we think about using that in terms of creating a space for maternal health and mothers. So happy to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Cooper. I lead product design at a startup called MacRhythms. We design software to treat a variety of neurological conditions. So if someone has Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis or has lost a lot of movement functions because of a stroke, we have been on a journey to create prescription level digital health products to help treat these conditions. And that journey was really born out of our founding clinicians who had been treating patients directly in hospitals in the Boston area for years. And they had a really hard time keeping up with the demand for patients that needed this type of treatment, because it's very niche, the type of treatment that they provide. And so to really figure out how to treat it at scale, they started exploring the technology route. My background, I've been working in digital health as a big passion area of mine since about 2011 in a variety of areas, from mental health, including depression and anxiety, to maternal and child health. So it's really wonderful to do with Pump Spotting today. It's a really big area for me too. And infectious disease work, and a lot of my work ranged from working with big groups like the WHO on policy and strategy for digital health, but also with groups that were working on the ground, like community health centers, directly providing care, hospitals, research institutions, NGOs. And the more that I saw, the more I wanted to get involved with digital health that works in clinical trial realm to really understand where do interventions help, but separate from that, how do digital health interventions actually improve outcomes for patients? So I just joined MacRhythms about 2 years ago. And now I'm based in Portland, Maine, but I'm a Husky alum, so it's wonderful to be here with you all. And Mega had mentioned how interdisciplinary this group is, which just really is at the crux of healthcare innovation. In my mind, it really takes the most interdisciplinary teams and minds possible. So it's wonderful to meet you all.
Thank you both so much. And thanks, T, for giving us a little introduction. So I'll be taking over. We'll be doing a question portion of this event. And then towards the end, we'll open it up for a Q&A with the rest of the audience. So if you have any questions, please leave them till the end, or you can throw them in the chat and we'll ask them at that point. So I'm gonna start kind of broadly. What do you think the advantages of digital therapeutics are, and how have your products helped people in ways that traditional medicine may not have?
I guess a question here for Amy would be if she considers herself a digital therapeutic, because this is, I mean, terms and jargon in healthcare, we love it and we love acronyms. So it's fun that we get to tackle this right off the bat. For ours, because we have been working in unpacking the industry of digital health for a while in digital therapeutics. I'm happy to go first. But for me, when you look at the digital health realm, so much of our world today, no matter what country you live in, even if you're in sub-Saharan Africa or Boston, is digital. And regardless of whether it's coming from a provider or not, like digital access to care has just become a part of our life, even if it's just you Googling something and symptoms and trying to navigate what's out there. So within this big umbrella, you start to have, tools for people in their day-to-day life, employers, and patients directly starting to have some sort of technological use case in their life, whether it's helping screen and refer for something that's going on, whether it's helping bring counseling into the digital realm, like we're seeing with Teledoc and Talkspace and a lot of the telehealth that's going on during the pandemic. You also have direct care from a physician who can actually treat through the technology itself, which I think starts to encapsulate some of the digital therapeutic side of it, where it's just defined as software as an intervention itself that can treat, prevent, or manage a disease is kind of a subset in that big umbrella. And then you have a self-care market, which has been huge, and there's so many amazing products out there that could include, the Headspaces of the world, Calm, and a wide variety of things. So I think what separates digital therapeutics is that they're trying to clarify value for patients at the end of the day. For me, I think it can be really confusing for patients and providers and families and caregivers to understand, my loved one or myself has a concern or needs support in a certain area. What can help me and in what way? And so digital therapeutics have to go through a number of steps before you can actually get in the hands of a patient, including clinical trials to actually evaluate from third parties the effectiveness. Really specific claims. So the difference would be like if you had a self-care application in the mental health case, for example, their claim as a consumer app might be, we help reduce stress, or we help improve connectivity, or we help improve overall sense of wellness. A digital therapeutics claim would need to be closer to, we can treat chronic depression. You're starting to get really specific in terms of claims. I need to go through a lot of rigor and clinical research and regulatory evaluation and approval before you can start using that term. If it sounds like a lot more work, it potentially is. I mean, they're all really complex and wonderful. It's why we love healthcare innovation. But I think at the end of the day, what's really exciting about it is that you're ideally hoping to clarify value across digital health and make sure that if you put something in the hands of the patient, that it can do what it says it can do before it actually gets to them. So that's how I've been thinking about digital therapeutics.
That's such a fantastic description across the board, Sarah. Thanks for outlining and clarifying. And in terms of, where pump spotting falls, I think that where we probably wouldn't clarify ourselves as a digital therapeutic, we probably fall more in the self-care space in terms of what we offer and how we work. I think in a lot of ways, what pump spotting does well is bridge gaps in care. The way we built our platform is really built off of proven models that produce positive breastfeeding outcomes, for example. There's been so much done around proof points around peer-to-peer support, for example, or access to lactation professionals, or getting the postpartum mental health check-ins at the right points. And so essentially what we're doing is thinking of how can what we build be kind of the great unifier, and how can we think about this human journey that parents are on, because feeding a human is very much a human journey. And so the lens we're coming to it through with our technology is if we think about that journey from start to finish and all those tiny points along the way that are either stressors or crisis moments or just educational need moments, how can we think about the experience on a real minutia level that a parent might be going through, and what are all those moments and those points of impact that might prevent a parent from continuing to breastfeed, for example? Are they going back to work? Do they have, a health event? Did they start out in the NICU? which changes or impacts the whole journey. And so I think what we're doing is drawing on some of the amazing work that's being done, you know, in hospitals, in homes, through lactation consultant support, through communities. And we're thinking, how can we take the best of that? How can we partner with all those various components? And how can we be essentially the guide or the nourishment system throughout that journey? And I think thinking about it that way is a bit different, because we're almost coming from an emotional lens, and we're coming from an experiential lens in terms of how we might solve healthcare. And I think we're also thinking pretty expansively. You know, we're still fairly early in the phase of where we are as a startup, but we're building the back end and the technology, you know, in conjunction with a lot of partners. And, you know, with Mass Challenge, we worked with Brigham and Women's Hospital in terms of what are they doing and how does that look? And I think we're kind of thinking of how can we be this true connection point, and how can what we bring to the table as a different minded startup, how can we think about the emotional support on a deeper lens, and then really helping guide parents to the more traditional forms of healthcare support that they might need to succeed.
Thank you for those well-detailed responses. Kind of going off what you said about being a very unique company, what's something that sets your company apart from others in your field? So you can talk about self-care, digital therapeutics, whatever you feel best.
Yeah, I'll just go quickly. We like to joke that we're a nourishment system powered by technology. So I think one of the things that sets us apart is that, you know, rather than think about what the technology can do, we think about, like, what does a parent need, and then how can we creatively use technology to do that. And traditionally in the breastfeeding and postpartum space, I mean, there's so many amazing companies coming out and things are changing and building, but traditionally breastfeeding support has been almost point solution. So either you see a lactation consultant once in the hospital, or if you have a problem, you know, if your milk isn't coming in and the baby's not gaining weight, then you see you know, lactation consultant. You buy a breast pump, or you need a place to pump, or you know, it's kind of been single-minded a little bit in terms of serving this journey and what the needs are. And I think that that's done a disservice to all the little moments and places that really add up to someone struggling, you know, to thinking it's like discounting so much of the struggling that happens, you know, at 3 a.m. when a parent hasn't slept for 3 days. And, you know, they're kind of in this, that is when postpartum depression takes, is you're in this place of labor, you know, trying to juggle, am I able to keep my milk supply up, and am I doing what's needed as a parent? And all those moments of self-doubt and things that happen, they happen in between your appointments with your providers, and they happen, you know, in between your check-ins. So one of the things I think that sets us apart is that we're really going deep with the subtleties around care and support for this population. And then we're thinking about how can technology intuit those pain points and the drop-off points and the needs, how can it personalize them, and how can it make access to what you need to kind of circumvent postpartum depression getting to the next level, or getting, you know, overwhelming, or getting somewhere. And I think that's kind of the lens that Pump Spotting's trying to do from a different perspective.
All right, so what were the initial challenges in approaching and encouraging patients with mental health challenges or diseases to use your products? So I know, Amy, you're talking about postpartum depression or just general self-doubt as a parent. And for Sarah, I know that we discussed that your products focus more on neurological conditions such as Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and stroke. So if you could both touch on these topics, that'd be great too.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess before MedRhythms, I've done a lot of work with patient communities on screening and self-care management programs and behavioral health clinics, where working with these different types of populations and trying to get peak engagement into care, both digital and in person, is really difficult for a number of different reasons. And a lot of that has transitioned into MedRhythms as well. So similar to what Amy was talking about, like our treatments are very vertical in one way, in that there's a very specific type of condition that we're trying to improve. So basically looking at those that have lost motor function, how can, through repeated movements with rhythmic stimuli, can you actually help develop new neural pathways that you can help them regain that ability to walk again? That's a very narrow focus for a product, but humans are so multidimensional. And so a lot of, I think, challenge in digital health, really any healthcare intervention, is to look at the width of it as well. I mean, the whole context of a person's life and everything else that's going on. And, you know, clinically, the term comorbidity is used a lot just to signify people that have multiple diagnoses or conditions going on. But to me, I think it's just life is like the real definition of it, is that, you know, patients, even if we're treating them with Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis, for walking conditions, understanding that statistically, prevalence wise, but also qualitatively wise, from our patients' voices themselves. I mean, they're dealing with depression, low motivation, often low social support, isolation, big time, which I guess our team has really been trying to root themselves in during COVID, to even just try to live from the perspective of a lot of our patient communities we work with, where it's hard to leave your house and feel safe. You can't really go anywhere. It's not safe to go into public facilities. You don't know if it'll be accessible. You don't know what to expect. You're worried about bumping into people. Like, this is actually really core characteristics of every single type of person that we work with. And so, although as a digital therapeutic who's really trying to specify, you know, claims and clinical trials, and actually get something that is more similar to a pharmaceutical in a way, where, you know, someone takes a medicine because it's prescribed. I think that's what digital therapeutics is trying to push into, where you'd actually get prescribed the software by a doctor. So it has to be really specific. How do you maintain that specificity with quality and scale, but like still understand this massive horizontal context in a person's life? So we do similar work mapping the patient journey, just to understand, you know, regardless of our actual therapy, what else is typically going on across the board for different groups and personas of patients. And that goes from being told by the healthcare facilities that there really is nothing left for you. There's really not a lot of treatment options once you get a certain degree into your illness. From where would you learn about potential treatments? What support groups are you or are you not a part of? Other types of support groups, exercise routines, existing and non-existing, habits, motivations, challenges, income levels, you know, racial backgrounds. All of this context actually helps us understand what are likely barriers to actually getting into access and then actually utilizing a type of treatment over the course that it's available, but then also what are enablers. So what are good things that we could understand from a behavioral science side of things, how you could coach someone through an experience. And I think mental health can't be treated just as a vertical. I think one of the things I'm hopeful about is that the more people might start to engage with some different tools in their own home, whether it's in the self-care modality or digital therapeutics or through their doctor, is that you start to have healthcare travel with them. And so in a way, could we more thoughtfully interlace multiple different types of programs and support and options for patients, so that we could actually even detect if someone is depressed while using our app, and kind of co-treat in a way, while our primary treatment is in this one other area, like neurological conditions. And it's just, you know, before COVID, rates were skyrocketing across the country. There are different types of groups of people in the US, at least by itself, that have a higher rate of it. And I think those that, whether it's postpartum or it's someone who has a chronic health condition, you just can't extract the two together. They're so close together. And so I think this is a big question for healthcare innovation alone, is like not just how to get really good, high quality, cost efficient, scalable, trustworthy, where patients trust it, because that's the ultimate currency at the end of the day, and why they would pick something up. How do you get them to use it and get the outcome that they deserve, but also use it as an opportunity to actually increase access to other treatments for other conditions that they might be struggling with.
So well said. I'm just thinking about so many things that speak to what you're saying, Sarah, that are true for where we are with the isolation, and, you know, coming from postpartum depression, you know, they say 1 in 8 women experience it, but those numbers in some places are up to 1 in 4, 1 in 5. And, you know, there's various shades around it. And it's really hard for parents to diagnose themselves, especially when you are in the fog of it, when your hormones are you know, post-birth, and you're dealing with all these things. And there's I think 2 things in terms of getting someone to reach out or use our technology or think about care. And one of those is that there's a lot of stigma and like long-seated feelings that we should be able to do this as parents and mothers, and that it isn't a mental health problem, and that motherhood should come naturally. And so on one level, I think we're really, especially culturally and in different places, we're sort of up against how do we get that conversation to change so that we can all be talking about the realities of this time period in life and what it means from a mental health perspective, and how we need to check in on people and how do we get them their care. And I think even, you know, traditionally, so women are kind of adrift a little bit, I think, especially in this pandemic. They're very isolated even more. As Sarah said, that's just such a huge part of it. And that feeds into this disconnection from care and from support when you're in that place. And you're, you know, in many situations taught to feel and think that you have to kind of do this on your own, and that you know, it's like if you're not doing well, but that's not a normal thing, and that's a problem. And then there's very few sort of check-ins after you give birth to really make sure throughout that entire first year and on, that 4th trimester, that you know, that you really are doing okay. And it's such an ebb and flow, the experience. And so what happens one day might look different another day. And so for us, I think getting people to really subscribe to the platform and to use technology is twofold. One is really about the way we're building it. It's an inclusive, inviting, welcoming space where it feels as though, gosh, if I need to be honest about how I'm feeling, what I'm going through, or raise a flag in terms of you know, my health and this not working. So many people on the app do speak about their postpartum depression or what they're feeling or what they're going through, and knowing that there's a non-judgmental space for them to have that conversation where it's safe, where it's accessible. So I think we do a lot of things. And from a technology perspective, even the language we use. So when a parent goes to post something on our community, for example, it says, talk to us, you know, you're not alone. And so sometimes just using the language and structuring it in such a way so that before they even raise their voice, thought about how to make this a space where they can be honest about what they're feeling, helps increase it and helps people so they can use this platform to be there. And then, you know, we're so community centric that I think that peer-to-peer support is just instrumental in allowing people to feel as though they say to someone else, you know, gosh, go here. This is where you can get support. This is where you can get help. And we're just leaning in to try and encourage and foster more of that.
In terms of space creation, I feel like you often hear people talk about peer support and community support. And then people also talk about how it's great to have a safe, anonymous space to talk to bots like Wobots and other conversational agents that can really facilitate a high degree of privacy, but also trained responses. And the answer is definitely both and. Like, there's just so much potential on all of these, and I really don't think you can remove one. It's incredible.
Thank you.
No, and I was just going to say, I think you're so right. And I think in designing, to your point, Sarah, of mapping this patient journey and thinking about the entire spectrum, to that point, you have to so holistically that it's not a, you know, that it's an and, not an or, how we build these every patient, every person who's struggling, especially with mental health, is going to come to this from different places, from different desires in terms of how they interact with care or what they need. And I think we have to think about building digital health systems and platforms that really are not one layered, that they allow for that expansion of interaction and care. And we learn, the more people interact with our technologies, the more we learn and the more we're able to lean into building for those multiple feelings and experiences.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate that you both talked about mental health stigma, because there is still a stigma, and that's definitely a barrier and a challenge. But I think we're very grateful to be growing up in a place where we can have these conversations. So kind of going off what something that you both discussed, do your products increase access to care to populations that tend to be less served by mental health care services? Particularly now, we've seen a lot of health inequities brought to light. So yeah, we just like to have this discussion.
Yeah, I think for us, the fact that we are virtually connecting parents to one another and to resources is a huge part of how we can really serve populations across the country and in various places. Certainly, I think for a lot of breastfeeding and postpartum support, there are a lot of parents who are in remote scenarios. Certainly now with the pandemic, we're all isolated, but definitely there are, if you can't physically get into a space in order to get care for yourself or your baby, we need to, we're helping increase access to professionals to that support for parents who can't physically get there. And then across the board, there are just huge discrepancies in terms of breastfeeding rates and biases in birth and breastfeeding, both culturally, what that looks like in terms of how it's what's happening for care in hospitals and with providers. And I think by us trying to build a community-centric space that really thinks about all the different experiences and where parents are coming from, we're hopefully really opening the door for like-minded conversations with like-minded parents, which really helps improve breastfeeding rates and opens the door. And I think just being able to really lean into support on a deeper level in communities, which has been proven to improve outcomes and really help parents get the support they need, and the virtual piece of it for us is a starting point on what needs to be a very deeper, very bigger push towards thinking about how we level the field in terms of maternal health care.
And for Measure I'm happy to answer from our context side, but then also just broader, unrelated opinions on mental health for digital health and really how we're stacking up. And on the Measure side, for me, it always starts with how you define access. I have multi-onion layer definition of it. So I think some of my colleagues would say, yes, we are, because that's the founding principle of the company, was we were treating people in person for this condition. And there are about 200 people in the country who have this type of training to treat patients. So in order to increase access, we have to go digital, or we have to increase training and ratios to patients and providers. So let's go digital. So for me, access, beyond geography, anyone in the country, and then eventually anyone in the world to be able to access our treatments. You also have disability accessibility in our community. We have a lot of patients who, because of the nature of their condition, have cognition challenges, walking impairments, fine motor dexterity challenges that make it really difficult to use the sensors in our technology and headsets and the smartphone. So not only doing ADA standards on design for contrast and typeface and colors and limited click-throughs and things like that, you kind of try to bring it to a whole new level of actually looking at voice-driven treatment sessions, not only for you and I in a Siri type cadence, but what about someone with speech aphasia? What would that look like? How could somebody with a speech language disorder actually still command the system? So we're kind of always auditing the system in that way. And then, you're looking at language right now, it's in English because it's our first go at it until we got regulatory approval, but eventually, pushing it into more and more languages. Age, what are people looking at in terms of engagement, content, tone, to actually get someone through a therapy session? Do we need to look at diversity of coaching personalities? Some people like tough love, some want really supportive, some don't want any. Like, I even think of that as an accessibility circle that we're going to have to adhere to. And then, of course, financial. And so for us, originally this type of therapy is usually covered by insurance, and it's part of the lure and the fear of a digital therapeutic pathway is that to get access, we're really excited that it's pushing software into a realm where you can actually have insurance pay for it, just like what they would a drug, which is fundamentally ground shattering for software as a treatment, that you could kind of line up neck and neck with what someone might be prescribing for tremors and Parkinson's disease or MS. This is kind of the holy grail in some ways, and in other ways it's terrifying to kind of be aligned in that way, with also some of the downsides of pharmaceutical business models to date. So looking at, how could we improve access by getting healthcare insurance, but not just private, actually looking at the Medicare population, especially for our older users. And then, if it's a cash pay option in the future, like some healthcare is, especially for really specialized care, can there be payment assistance programs? Can there be tiered access? Could there be cross subsidization so that those who can pay for it can kind of subsidize the cost for those who can't? Could there someday be freemiums with value clinically? Could there be kind of maintenance modes that you could kind of graduate someone into after they complete therapy that is free and more of a community level? So we're constantly asking ourselves these questions about accessibility. It's going to be a constant journey, almost like a mapping exercise just for ourselves as a company of where we're falling short. And even in the last 6 months, we started digging deeper into prevalence data for our patient population to really hold our company more accountable to using language about race and saying it's okay to talk about race. You don't have to be scary just to say, why is it that a lot of our patient advisory board is Caucasian and our team, and even those networks we might have in Maine, because we love to work locally, we love to really bring patients into every aspect of our design process. And so it's nice to work locally, but it doesn't necessarily reflect, for say, the stroke prevalence in the United States, which is really much more Southern and racially diverse. So like, how do you make sure you really are getting representation in so many different ways, income, background, language, perspective towards healthcare, really rooted in your product design, so that you're trying to design a treatment and treatment modality that really works well for a large array of people. For mental health, I think they have the same challenges in a lot of the leading more conventional treatments out there for things that get more airspace talked about with mental health. Like that in of itself is a really big umbrella, but like the usual suspects of depression and PTSD and anxiety, those that are pushing for a prescription have the same components, where unless you have private insurance, it's hard to get access to some really cutting edge healthcare innovations for software for mental health. There's a lot being done in opioids and substance use, which is really interesting, and companies like Pear and ADHD for Achilles that have all been opened up during COVID, which has been interesting to kind of see how this access question changes post-COVID, with a lot of insurers and programs trying to say, and employers saying, we'll cover this because we want everyone to have access to it. Like, will that continue or will that go away? For telehealth as well, to have that covered or substantially more affordable to help reduce barriers. So saying, well, it's really stressful for me to figure out who might be able to watch my children for a few hours, or leave work and lose salary to like travel somewhere with my car, try to get in a doctor's appointment, see if I like them, when we actually know most people want to date therapists. And that's excruciating to figure out how to go through that before you can see someone. Like, that telehealth barrier has been really interesting to watch emerge alongside the reimbursement changes recently. And then you see things like Headspace, where you're like, is this enough? No, because they're not claiming to be treating depression, but the fact that they have 85 million users around the world, curious to see what that patient database looks like and what their data looks like, but fascinating potential. They weren't around 10 years ago, and now all of a sudden you can treat, I shouldn't use the word treat, you can engage that number of people around the world. I think beckons a lot of potential for answering the accessibility question. But for all of us that are involved in actually building and testing and scrutinizing innovations, including our own, I think coming up with a scoreboard of like what you mean by accessibility and how do you define it, and how are you getting people to weigh in on how you define it, both of like peer practitioners, but also communities themselves to really hold you accountable, is going to be an exciting next decade.
Thank you. I feel like that was very interesting variety of definitions of accessibility that I didn't even think of before. So I'd like to thank you for answering all my questions, but now I'd like to open it up to our student audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute yourself. Yeah.
I have a quick question. And again, thank you guys so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I think I kind of wanted to go back to, I guess, the population health piece. And as you guys know, there's a lot of distrust, especially between minority communities and, healthcare systems, hospitals, just the industry as a whole. So how do you guys at your respective companies work to forge that trust between the target consumers, especially in these underserved populations, so that they can get the care that they need and really utilize your services to the most?
Yeah, well, we've built pump spotting from the community up, is maybe one way to think about this. And when we first launched the platform, it really came from a personal need for me in terms of what it was. And then we really felt as though if we were going to solve the challenges of breastfeeding, we needed to understand the state of it on a really deep level. And so actually, I bought a 40-foot RV and I turned it into a nursing and pumping oasis, and I moved on board for 5 months. And we traveled across the country. And in 2 years, we've stopped at over 65 cities, and we've met over 6,000 parents on board. And in doing that, one of the most important things for me was that it wasn't about us, it was about the communities and the care and the support that was already happening. And so for the tour, we built our stops and our discovery, our community gatherings by plugging in to the maternal wellness care that was taking place in all these cities and all these communities, whether that was in hospitals, whether that was at birthing centers, whether that was lactation consultant, mom's front doors, whatever it was. We really took a lot of time to say, those in the community understand the needs of their community and what it is that they're missing in terms of care and support. And we've tried to come to it from a lens of saying, how can I use my technology voice and the team and what we're building to really just elevate and amplify the connections and the work that's being done on an individual level. And so for me, that was really powerful, because I saw how different care looked in every community, and I saw the discrepancies in certain places in terms of what was needed. And then I also saw a lot of the commonalities and how we could build features and think about this experience in such a way that we were sure was starting to solve the deep needs by geographic location and economic situation, and just really across the board, what that looks like. And then meanwhile, in doing that, we really built relationships with really amazing advocates and community members. And so I think for us, we're continuing to build upon those relationships and that learning, and to stay as connected as possible to as many different patients and parents and people navigating this journey, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's how we're going to make sure we continue to serve everyone and deepen access. And then I think we're trying to be really mindful in terms of the partnerships that we build, and how do we get our solution in the hands of populations who really need it, by working closely with the organizations that do an amazing job already of extending care. So that might be a little different. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but that's how we're thinking about it, and coming really truly from this community lens, both in terms of how we build and how we serve.
I love that. All of that resonates so much. I'm getting flashbacks. I mean, 10 years ago, I approached the world more from international affairs and did a lot of work in microfinance, and remember studying the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh and how they were actually able to help families all across the country get access to loans and savings, help build businesses, and take care of their household cash flow. And their biggest strategy was figuring out who are the biggest influencers in local communities, whether it's religious leaders, just local characters, of which we all have them, the Avon lady model all around the world, of trying to understand how do you not abuse and understand community collateral in that way, and really use that as part of your deployment strategy. So that's really been ingrained in my brain forever. I don't think I could ever unwire it. So a lot of what Amy said has followed through to how I've approached a lot of digital health. For MedRhythms, we're pre-market right now, so we're still evaluating clinical effectiveness and then going through submission to the FDA to get approval before we're actually going to market. But it's something I think about a lot, and we were furthest along and focused on stroke right now. And the stroke population, you know, their typical journey is, you know, you have a stroke, you go through physical therapy until your insurance stops paying for it. You often have a lot of walking impairments and upper body impairments for a very long time, sometimes cognition, memory, but you no longer really go seek care. So a lot of them aren't actually already in an active care setting, whether they trust them or not. That engagement is really difficult because there's often nothing offered to them. They're often told you're never going to get better. And so how do you handle that with great care to even understand what you're telling someone, that you're not over promising what's capable? And so for us, I think our trust building with patients is going to have to start with immediate value at the individual level. I think you're working with a population that knows themselves when they can walk and when they can't, and physically where they're at and their quality of life, that you can both measure from a gait data perspective, but also just quality of life skills. So I think for us, we see that value resonate in product testers in our patient advisory board that we've developed, which is really neat. A lot of companies I haven't seen have, but we've created boards that are scientific advisors for each disease state. So you have, you know, leading experts in MS, leading experts in stroke and Parkinson's disease that guide the company. But we also have a patient advisory board that's at the same level as like a general board of directors that actually influences and changes and helps tweak the whole direction of the company. And so they're involved from everything from clinical research to patient communication to our product development process to how things look and feel and actually integrate into somebody's life, which I hope helps hold us accountable from an organizational structure. But like this overarching question of, for people who are reticent to engage with the healthcare system, how do you ensure that they are not left out of the digital health movement is a huge question for us. And for me, because we're so early in our journey and looking at, you know, what's commercial strategy, how do you actually get access to someone? Is it from a provider in an office, which assumes someone has a PCP or a neurologist that they see routinely? Or is it going to be through community support groups where there's actually a number they can call to actually do a telehealth consult to see if they're eligible and then get it prescribed and sent to their house? Like, how do you kind of have a multi-pronged avenue so that whether you're in the healthcare system pretty frequently or you're not, there's multiple inroads, but that actually getting people to use it is going to be coming from ideally word of mouth, you know, referrals from stroke survivors themselves, community support groups, people that have lived and felt and benefited from over the course of a treatment, the ability to now walk again. I think for a nascent thing like ours, where it's really new, we're just going to have to put the value where our mouth is, really.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Does anybody else have any other questions? I don't see any in the chat, but again, feel free to unmute yourself. We don't fight.
Someone messaged me once, so I can ask that on their behalf. So it's actually directed at Sarah. They're asking, so you mentioned the importance of a company's claim, which was essentially, you were saying, a commitment to what the company and the product can do. And then later you mentioned that you've all been kind of looking into the better mental outcomes from using your products. So would you be able to describe the process and the amount of time that it would take, like, for example, your company to take to reach the point of claiming to be able to actually improve mental outcomes on top of like the more physical outcomes? And Amy, this can also be applicable to your product as well. It's particularly the postpartum depression, like it's a very like, it varies very much from person to person, and it's difficult to kind of quantify like you'll be better after 5 months, because that's not something that's like doable or like conceivable to say. But yeah, just you both can take that.
Absolutely. So basically in our realm, because a lot of our patients and the business model that we're exploring right now is the digital therapeutic side, where it's prescription software. Every single journey really starts with understanding what's possible. So based on existing treatment in person all around the world, you know, leading researchers clinical experience of our therapy team who does this day in, day out, treating patients, our advisors, our patients, which are good candidates for this. I think that's where everything starts. Not everything should be digitized. In fact, many things shouldn't be. So we're really looking at narrow use cases that could add a lot of value for patients that have a massive gap in access. So it starts there. And so for us, the treatments that our clinicians provide day in, day out is really cemented in a lot of ways in MS and Parkinson's disease. So that's why we've chosen to focus on them first, and stroke. It's just a massive unmet need. So when you start looking at the patient population, which type of treatment lends itself well to some digitization. Some have a lot of different body components. Some are really nuanced. Some have a high degree of risk to digitize because someone might be in person and be at high risk of falling, or just need a physical therapist with them in addition to a neurotherapist to really help guide that treatment. So you start narrowing in on your use case, and then I think by looking at both existing clinical research and building partnerships with some of the leading institutions in the United States and overseas, structuring studies that ideally are run not by you or funded by you, but are coming up with something with MGH and Brigham and Women's, the Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, sites that lead rehabilitation care, structuring clinical research to evaluate something in what's called a feasibility study. So it's really early scale. And in that, you're looking at what would your claim be really specifically. So for us, it's that we can take someone who is at a walking ability where they can't really leave their house. There's actually thresholds for this, and like the number of meters per second that you can walk. And we want to get someone to what's called a community ambulation level, where you could walk across the street when the light changes comfortably and feel safe. And that can also be measured by meters per second. So our claim would be that we could improve someone's walking ability by, say, 20%, just as an example. And then we would start with a low scale feasibility study where you have to get to a certain statistical significance, but call it 80 patients. You could get the majority of them up to that level. That helps you understand a potential claim. Still really early scale, so you're going to want to do a large pivotal trial that starts to basically just build and have a bigger randomized control trial. Again, not by yourself, have someone else do it to really understand clinical effectiveness. So that's kind of how the claims process starts, is looking at what's a promising treatment, what is real even beyond technology as an intervention that has substantial potential, and then start to understand how narrowly could you design a technological use case to deliver that treatment at quality and at scale, and then start to evaluate it with a really specific claim to see if you could actually get that functional change solely by software by itself, and then grow those clinical trials and continue to evolve them. So things are great in a lab. We all know that. The real world is not a lab. It's really messy. And so there's also a massive world of real world evidence generation, where then you want to actually, have people enroll in a study where they get prescribed this software and it shows up at their house and they use it, but they're actually in a clinical trial. And then you see, and the dog's barking and they're depressed and they're not at the facility with the motivation of a coordinator barking at them to use it. Do they actually get that outcome, which is what we all want? So it's a really long journey to define that claim and then evaluate it and then understand it and then see, what's the best way to help get it funded so it's sustainable. That's a journey. And I think when it comes to layering on mental health outcomes, the same thing will need to happen. So we know there's a really high prevalence of comorbidity with MS and depression, for example. I think we would have to do the same thing and actually determining what scores and what assessment data would we want to use to understand how to shift the needle on something like depression. So we're using the PHQ-9 in some sort of way before someone starts a trial, and then kind of monitoring each session or midline or at the end line. How could you actually start including some of this maybe patient self-reported data into the application itself, so it's really kind of co-assessing it while they're using the treatment for walking, I think would be one way. But it's not perfect. I think as anything, it's like we're starting to be able to collect so much data, whether it's bio data just from walking and gait and movement and heart rate and oxygen levels and all of these things. Are those biomarkers for depression? Do we know that? And then what are self-reported data like quality of life and PHQ-9 and like all these other screeners that doctors use to assess like what degree of depression someone might have, and how do you capture that in something like a digital therapeutic? It was probably a lot more than you asked for.
Oh, it was amazing. I was just going to say, Sarah, you've given such a thorough answer. I think from our perspective, we're still kind of at the really early phases. And so we look at it in terms of, how can we assess the impact that the touch points with bump spotting is having in terms of improving breastfeeding outcomes or connecting parents to care. And so we're kind of at the very early stages in terms of, what are we learning from what we're serving and how is that impacting. For example, just on a tactical level, we ask parents, what their breastfeeding goal is. Do they want to make it through today? Do they want to make it through 6 months? Do they want to make it to a year? Do they want to go as long as they can? And then we're checking in with them to see, are they reaching that? Are they exceeding that? What is preventing them from getting through? And likewise, we're talking to some strategic partners who can help us really track the postpartum depression mental health piece of it, the check-in and where are they at different stages, and are the inputs of what their feeding journey looks like increasing or decreasing, the number of women who are experiencing symptoms or reaching out for help. So we're far from the claim piece and getting to that point. From us, it's more just looking at the data points we have coming in from our product and how can we start to evaluate what we're learning from that and who can we work with that helps us research and understand, on a greater level when we start to think about expanding from a more clinical perspective, or if we go that route in the future.
And that's where a huge predictive modeling question comes in. That's going to be the next Everest of digital health, and we're starting it now, but again, like, we've generated more data this year than has probably ever existed in human history. And so I think understanding how to store and what to do with it and make meaning out of it is our mountain. And I think a lot of that's going to be happening. We can probably detect patterns if someone seems like they're depressed, but for our case, is it because they're still homebound and so they haven't gotten the gait improvements that we're hoping to get to try to help them get out of the house and feel less isolated and feel more connected and back to work and have more autonomy? What's the relationship there? Or if someone shows that they have low adherence to our product and they're not walking very much, what's going on there? Is the device broken? Is it a user error? They don't understand what's going on. Is it low motivation? Is it depression? I think there's just going to be a lot of interesting analytics in the future for us, and also understanding if we can predict any sort of correlation between presence and degree of mental health conditions in our patient population and how that impacts their outcomes when they're done with our walking treatment, and vice versa. What's the relationship between improving someone's gait and actually improving their mental health? It's going to be a fun predictive modeling journey.
Thank you both. Those were really in-depth responses that I really appreciated, but I think something that you both touched on was kind of like the breadth of data that we now have access to and how it's a good and bad thing. And I know we were discussing it before we even got started, given COVID and everything, mental health is definitely not at a high currently. So I would definitely say there's a lot of work, and I'm really glad to hear from both of you and your companies and what you're doing for it. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I say it's fun because it's not my job. So someone else will have to figure out all of those analytics questions.
Yeah, so thank you so much for your time and your insights. We believe that your sharing will really inspire our students. And for those who join us today, we really appreciate your attendance and just sharing of our next event. So our next event will be on Thursday, the October 29th. It is the last event of our digital health speaker series. And the following event will be on the November 12th. It is the Leader in Healthcare event. And we're also really excited to be hosting a virtual food drive to raise money for Rosie Place in Boston. So please help us reach our goal of 300 by scanning the QR code below and donating. And we would really appreciate any amount. And thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next event. And to keep updated with Vital, you can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And also subscribe to our newsletter to be the first to know our upcoming events. And if you have any questions or ideas, please email us at vitalnortheastern@gmail.com. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a great idea to have a fundraiser at the end. I love that. I love Rosie's Place. But thank you so much, everyone. This was so wonderful. It's a nice Thursday evening bump in spirit. And I guess quick plug I put in the chat too. We actually just released our first Northeastern co-op. So we're a small startup, about 15 people, but we have 4 new roles posted for January to July. So send me a note if you're looking for one.
That's really exciting because I'm looking for one. So that's great to hear. But thank you both so much. Your work has such a great impact, and everything you said tonight was very inspirational. So thank you very much.
Us.
Of course. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Al.
Bye, take care.